everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 686. Today we're going to talk about On Mars. This is coming from Eagle Gryphon Games and designed by Vital Lacerda, who has done games like Vinhos and Gallerist and a bunch of other really complex, heavy Euros. On Mars is no exception. Plays 1 to 4 players, and the theme of it obviously is like colonizing Mars and various different like technologies and things like that. And you are one of the participants trying to sort of eke out a living and existence on Mars. I'm going to jump into how to play, sort of. I think it's not really worth for me to do an exhaustive how to play. There is a official how to play video by Gaming Rules. Paul Grogan did a very fine video on how to play the game. I've watched this video I think twice now, and read through the rulebook a couple times, and I was originally taught the game by somebody else, so I've had a lot of kind of ways to learn the game. I'll just kind of say up front, this is definitely one that, like a lot of his games, it's not too bad, but that first kind of initial hurdle and that sort of threshold that you have to hit is there. Like there's a good sort of membrane of learning that has to happen. You have to sort of pass through that and then claw your way through, and then once you get to the other side, it's not too bad. It plays pretty snappy. I'll talk more about playtime and stuff in the review. But let's jump down. I'm going to give you kind of the gist of it, not exhaustive how to play, but I am going to call out, I think, some key parts of the game. I played it 5 times now. I'll talk more about that again in the review, but there's some certain things that sort of come to life, if you will, after you play it a few times, that reading the rules or watching Paul's video or whatever is not really going to give you. What I think is actually a cool thing, because there's a lot to actually kind of discover here. I know I'm doing a lot of preamble. I've only played it 5 times. I can see myself playing this a good 10 or 15 more times before I start to really like lock in, and everything kind of becomes second nature. But let's jump down to the table, take a look at it. I'll come back and give you the whole review spiel after. Okay, so there's a lot of various sort of main areas to focus on. Obviously, you have the planet surface here. Each player starts with a different kind of headquarters in their color. You can see these buildings here on the 4 corners here laid out. The layout of your buildings is going to change based on the number of players. You can see these little dot icons there. So based on the number of players, your starting buildings will be laid out a little bit differently. You have some starting resource buildings here. This mine here that gives you the minerals you can see depicted there is always in the middle, but the other 4 around here are randomly distributed. So you have the main board, and then you have that divided into kind of 2 areas of actions. You've got the left hand side here. These are sort of like worker placement action spaces. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have this right hand side here, which has some action spaces and some other little tracks and things there. Basically, you're going to have your little astronaut figure on 2 sides of the board. So the blue and the purple player here are on this side, and then we'll jump up from orbit down into the planet surface, and the green and yellow player are here. So based on where your astronaut is, that's the actions that you can take for your turn. There's just going to be this rocket that's jumping back and forth to start the game that you can travel with if you wish, and that will, you will then, move your astronaut, do some actions based on that, and then you'll be on the other side and be able to take actions there. As the game progresses, this ship isn't going to jump every round. It's going to jump to the 2 spot, and then it's going to move down, and then it's going to jump, and then it's going to go to the 2 spot at the start of the next round there. So there's a little bit of jumping and stuff that happens there. But really the goals of the game can be quite varied. You can really kind of sort of specialize and invest in certain aspects of growing this colony on Mars, and you sort of piggyback on other players and what they're doing, build on top of buildings that they've made, use technologies that they've advanced, and then you can also really kind of specialize in doing like upgraded buildings, specializing in doing lots of technologies, specialize in the transport of citizens and so on, with building more ships and stuff like that. Now, a lot of it really has to come down to this building display here. So these are various different types of buildings. You can see you can build this one like that, and this will give you another like mining building and so on. But you can see underneath here the resource it costs to build that building. So this one, you'll need an extra worker here to place and build the mine. You'll then need a mineral, which you get from the mine, to build the battery buildings, which give you energy. And then if we sort of pan over here, the battery's used for the water's used for the plants, and the plants are used for the oxygen buildings. Now, this is a nice kind of suggestive thing to sort of ingest and try to digest for your first play, at least first couple plays, in terms of how the order of the buildings work. But really, the whole game kind of centers around this idea for getting resources sort of for free. And the gist of the game really is like an action optimization thing where you're trying to get a bunch of free stuff to happen on your turn. To my mind, that's kind of the best way I can say to approach winning. Is like if you do something that's going to give you a bunch of other free actions and free resources and so on, that's really where you're going to get most of your points. You're going to end up with most of your points at the end of the game. The other kind of couple areas I want to show you is off to the side here, we have some blueprints. At the start of the game, there's just these 6, and then more will come out, and you can see they change color down there, and they get a little bit more harder to build, but they also give you more points and some cooler special abilities. Let's take a quick example of one. Like here, this is an upgrade blueprint. So as you build an oxygen building, you can see that there, you'll be able to take one of your building tokens, and when you take this card, you'll put one of your colored building tokens on top of it. And then when you actually build that upgrade and put this onto the board, this will unlock a special power, give you some extra points, and so on. But you can see these are all as well tied into all of the various different types of resource types. Whereas you go over on this side of the board, there's a bunch of these scientists, and you can see they're also associated with the different resources. And then you have a little scientist worker here. And this is going to give you the ability to do free actions on some of those blueprints that we just looked at as you upgrade them and so on. So everything is kind of very finely tuned and chained together. As well, let's take a look at the yellow player's player board here. You have these little buildings here that you can build, and these are where you can actually store more workers. You'll see you unlock spaces here for more workers to store, so it gives you to do more actions and do more powerful boosted actions. And of course this, to have people there, you need oxygen. So that whole chain of resources is going to play into this, and you definitely want to pursue that. And as you start to build ships here, you're going to unlock special abilities. Every time you build one of these ships, you'll get more people that you'll need to have on uncovered spaces to store them and so on. And then down here we have places where we store. You can see the different types of goods here. Everybody starts with one of these. And then you can only store, at the start of the game, 2. It's always you can store 1 plus the number of shelters that you have. Now you start the game with 1 on the board, so you can have 2 of each resource, but very quickly you're going to want to have more places to store those. And in addition to workers, you want to have places to store the resources, because you're going to end up actually throwing the resources away. So that's kind of tied in. Here's the tech tree here, and there's a lot going on right here. So let's just take a quick brief overview of all the different actions that you can do in the game, starting left to right. So you always start here with the player that's on the leftmost spot on this turn order track. No matter where this main ship is here, it could be on this side, but you're always going to go left to right, and then you go up to here, and then the players that are over here on the planet will take their actions up there. And you can see right here, here is a spot to take blueprints. Now you can see this particular spot, you need to have a worker to place out there to actually take one of these blueprint cards, which I looked at earlier. But you can discard additional workers to take more than just the 1 card. In your little living quarters here, so I could discard an extra one there into the work area, and then instead of just taking the 1 card, I could take 2 cards. The other thing is, if there are other players already at that space, you will have to discard 1 of your workers for each other different colored player that's there at that spot. So there's not really blocking per se, but things get more difficult to do. So again, it's good to have these workers here. The next spot you can see here is to take one of these technology tiles. Now you don't actually have to place a worker out to do it, but you can see by this icon that you can boost it, so I can take more than 1 technology tile. The cost to take the technology tiles will vary here. These bottom 2 are free. This second row you need a battery resource. This top one you need a battery, and then any other resource. And these randomly come out. At certain points of the game you'll kind of refresh these, and it's just a second copy of all these technologies. Again, the one thing I want to stress, these technologies, probably the most important one, I would say inarguably, even though the other ones are quite good, is all the ones that have to do with building the various different building types. Because again, you can share that technology. Other players can leech off of the technologies that you develop to help them along. You're going to want to be able to grab that because you will get a benefit for that. Now, these other technologies that don't have to do with the resource buildings are still really good. Well, especially this one here, which allows you to move your rover extra spaces, but we'll get there. When you get technology tiles, let's say we grab this mineral one here, you're going to put it in one of these two spaces there, immediately get the resource there so you can get, I'll explain this, from the supply depot, or get crystals, which are really good to have. But once you fill up these two spots, you can't get any new technologies until you start to advance them off of this beginner spot and start to get them up the track. So you will want to do that and move those up. And so how do you do that? Is by going to this spot here. You can see that's a worker placement spot there, which you can boost. Whenever you do that, you can bump up 2 technology steps, which I could do 1, 2 spaces, or 2 different 1, 2 space each. Now there is a cost. You can see here to sort of bump it up into this section here, you have to discard any resource. These are the ones you have to discard: oxygen, and then up here oxygen resource, and so on. So there is a cost to doing that. These indicators here, the +1, +2, +3, are going to boost up the technology. So obviously as it progresses further along, you're going to get better and better at doing it. Be able to build, in this case, larger mineral buildings, larger complexes of shelters, and then when you take the ship action to build these ships, you'll get extra workers and so on. So the gist obviously is the more you progress it, the bigger and better things are going to be. Now, the last spot on this side in orbit is this spot here to take a resource here from the supply depot. When you take the basic action, you just pick any one of these. So I could take a crystal or any of these resources. You can again boost it by discarding extra workers into your workspace and taking more of those. Anytime you see this, you're going to take the resources out of here, which could be limited. Otherwise, if you see something that says take a resource without that icon, it'll just be taken off the general supply off the side of the board. So those are all the actions here on the left hand side of the board. Kind of setting yourself up, sort of bringing technology and plans and blueprints and maybe a little bit of a seed money kind of idea with a number of resources into the planet, so you can actually start developing the colony and taking these actions on this side. Now, one thing I want to mention here before we jump to those actions is, again, this spot up here is turn order, and as you jump back and forth, if you jump from space onto the planet, you'll put out little bonus tokens that you can hoover up with your rover. I'm not going to get into details there. When you jump back, you will collect resources from any mines where you have workers, or any places where you put your special buildings on and build upgrade buildings off of these cards like I was showing you earlier. So it's a good way to kind of build up an engine here, do the jump back, and then you'll just kind of, hopefully if you've built up a good little engine, kind of pump out a bunch of resources which you can then use. And as well, when you take your worker here and jump it, there'll be little bonuses, like you get extra resources and move your bots and stuff. Or you could just, jump for turn order and try to be earliest on either of these sections. So the top 2 spots on the planet are probably maybe the most important parts of the game. So the top one here is to actually build a building, and this one is again to upgrade a building like I showed you earlier. Again, the resource to build a building is right there indicated under there, so you just need one of those resources to build it. And you can build a building pretty much wherever you need to, with a couple of small rules which I'll talk about. So first off, you need to build around or under one of your bots. You can get more bots out on there. You pay the resource on the back of these. Some of them you'll have crystals, so you put crystals out on the board wherever you choose to put it. And then when you go to build, you have to either build right adjacent to the same kind of building. So let's say you wanted to build another oxygen thing, and so you got to build it basically adjacent to an existing one, or at least 2 spaces away exactly. So I could build it here if I wanted to, because that's 2 spaces away from that building, and it's adjacent to my bot, because you've got to be, again, adjacent to your bot. Now, to build it and adjacent to an existing building and sort of grow it as a complex, somebody needs the technology, which I talked about earlier. See how we have this building boost technology? You need to have advanced that a number of spaces based on how large that complex is going to end up being. So even if you don't have that technology, you can make use of it. When you do that, then that player who has the technology will get a free oxygen, no matter what kind of building it is. It doesn't matter if it's an oxygen or a mining complex or water, they'll get the oxygen. And then at the end of your turn, if you give them the oxygen, they can choose to keep that oxygen, or they can boost up that technology that you made use of here. So let's say on your turn you did something different, which we'll talk about in a second. Let's say you moved your rover a couple of spaces, but you wanted to move it extra. Somebody else has the rover boost movement technology. If you use that, then again, they would take a oxygen from the supply, and if they wanted to keep that, they could, or they could boost for free without paying the cost that technology that you made use of. So that's a really interesting part of the game. So that's how you build the building there. Before we talk about upgrading the building, there is a sort of a fancy scoring part of this when you build a building. So let's look at that. So here you can see the colony level. And so when you build a building, you're going to check and see, was that type of building needed by the by the colony? Yes, it was, because it's underneath that level. So we just built oxygen, so boom, that's going to move it up. The first time anybody does that, you're going to get 2 points. If you built a building that was in need like that, then you're going to score the bonus that's at the top here. And these are just, you're going to get bonus points for various things, like you might have ships or robots or bonus tokens or buildings, whatever. Those are randomly put out. You're going to get extra bonuses when you build that type of thing. So you can see how having a bunch of this stuff, okay, that's the best bonus I should go after. Maybe I have a lot of ships, maybe I have a lot of these bonus tokens. So I want to focus on building green plant buildings or battery buildings or whatever. So good luck trying to like work that all into a cohesive strategy, especially the first time you play. Because somebody else invariably is going to come along and build that. Oh, I built that before you. That's no longer a needed building, because if you build it again, sure, this is going to bump up, but you're not going to get any of those bonuses like that. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is if you build a complex, it doesn't matter the size of it, doesn't matter where these are on the track, but if I build a complex, let's say of green, I will take this cube here. This is on my board, and you have a cube for each of the different building types. So I'll take this off of that board because I just built the green building, let's say. And I'll go ahead and mark that, and I've done that for my one time for the game. And the more cubes you have here, let's say I built a water building, a water complex later on, and then I did a mineral complex, then you're going to get through various parts of the game, and the end of the game, based on the number of cubes you have here, some additional points, and these can kind of add up. Once all of these building types have been moved up to here so they're even, the colony is going to kind of like level up. It's going to, move into its next progression of life. That's going to move up. We're going to trigger a whole bunch of things. We're going to reset some blueprint cards, put some new resources and technology tiles out like that. Once it starts to move up a little bit further, like you can see here, it's actually going to move this little tracker further down, and it might even reset it to this position if you move it up really quickly. And then that's going to trigger the end of the game. Everybody gets another turn, and then you go through this kind of bonus scoring. All these icons remind you of that. Now, there are other things that will push along the end of the game, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that's all kind of wrapped into just that building a building action. What's needed by the colony, did you build a complex? Have you built one yet? What kind of bonuses are you going to try to score? So you're going to try to pair that with the the resource type and so on. Now, once the buildings are built, you're going to want to upgrade them. And this is the spot where you go here, you put a worker out there, same rules as before. And then, like I said, you're going to take the building piece off of one of the blueprints that you stole earlier from the board there. And then you're going to want to build and put that out. So let's say we got this earlier. These always cost a mineral to put out. And I should say before I forget, these mineral tokens here, these are like wilds. You can have them be anything. So they're really nice. So I do this, and it's got to go out onto this same type of building out on the board. And I don't remember if I said this, but one thing I've seen people forget is when they take their building card, this upgrade card, they get that resource for free. So whenever you draft these cards on that action, you get that resource, which is handy. So I build that, and I'll put that on the board. And again, it's got to be adjacent to a bot, and then I'll just put that on any matching building tile there, and I've got that. And again, that's going to generate that resource for me when I move my worker back to space. So anything that you have a building on is a good thing to have. But more importantly, I've unlocked here a special ability, which is, in this case, you can see is to grab a technology tile. This is the matching icon for that. And so I can do this on my turn for spending 2 crystals, or if I have the oxygen scientist, which I'll talk about in a minute, then you can do it for free. Now that's called an executive action. So you've unlocked for yourself a new executive action. Everybody starts with these 3 here. So you can see grab resources from the supply depot, move your bots around. This is the symbol to take an action on your card. As you build these ships, you unlock more. You're always spending crystals to do those. I should say, you can see if you don't ever upgrade this and build the building, you actually will lose 3 points instead of gaining 3 points at the end of the game. So that's a strategy to get a bunch of these cards. That's one thing that you can do. Now, speaking of the scientist, which I mentioned just a minute ago, you can go here, you can take a scientist, These are these cards that were laid out at the beginning of the game. You can see maybe we want that Oxygen Scientist, right? So we'd pay 2 green resources. We would take this guy here, and then this would allow us here to use that upgrade building that we just used, but we could also send this to another player, put it on their upgrade card and use it for free, and then they could use it for free while he's still sitting there. So, excuse me, this is actually a sheet here. And this also will give you some bonus points at the end of the game for all of the upgraded shelters and so on. So these all kind of work like that. Once you get that, you are actually going to be able to dig through, this is another neat part of the game, this stack of bonus cards. And there's a couple different stacks that you can choose and put in the game. And say I find this one here, let's say, oh, I don't know. I could do this one here and put that there. So maybe I say, oh, I plan on having a lot of crystals and some minerals at the end of the game, but somebody else can come along and buy it for that same action for a crystal, because you can see these kind of shift here. Or let's say, you know what, I think I'm going to be the only one to be able to build an upgrade building on a complex of that type of building, of those battery buildings, and that's going to give you extra points. Again, you'll lose points if you're not able to satisfy that. So this is a really interesting thing to kind of get a scientist that's going to benefit you, and then choose and dig through, you know, this stack of cards here and put out a bonus that you think maybe only you can go after. But do that early enough, and you know, it's good to get a scientist early, right? Because then you get those free bonuses. So then you put out a little bit of a flag there. Somebody says, oh, well, they put that 12-point bonus out there, and I can see I could kind of go for that. And they've sort of given me a goal now, sort of indirectly. So it's an interesting little piece there. So we got 2 more actions to talk about, and that's these 2 here. These don't cost a worker to do. This one here, you can move your rover 2 spaces and move your bots up to 2 spaces. And then this one here is to build a ship, and you can boost this one with workers and boost this one with crystals to move extra spaces. I talked about moving the ships. You get the ships out. They give you extra workers with bots that you can put out. Moving your bots around, of course, is good, because as the buildings start to fill up, maybe you want to move around, you want to build other places. The rover's good. Everybody has a rover in the central mine to start with. They're not on the board because everybody would be packed in here. But once you start moving them, then you'll take your piece and move it out. Now the bot is going to destroy pieces that it stops on. And the rover is going to pick up pieces that it stops on. There's all kinds of tokens that are come out through jumping, like I said here, back and forth from Mars. There's going to be bonus tokens being put out. These tokens here are always out at the start of the game. These give you two free technology advancements for free without paying anything, and so on. So that's kind of moving that around. There's a lot more intricacies and strategies there I'm not going to talk about right now. But that's all the actions of the game. Now, if you look back here, one more thing to talk about. You see how I have this A here, and then down here we've got this C. So when you set up the game, you will randomly put out missions. And these missions you can have long and short missions. That'll dictate the length of the game. Anytime anybody does an action here, like this is action B, this is just take a technology tile. Sometimes somebody does that, you're gonna move that down. If you do it, you get a bonus crystal. You might get 2 crystals for some of these. These are gonna tick down as people do them. You set it up based on the number of players. So if you're playing with 2 players, it only has to happen 7 times. If you do it with 4, it has to happen 12 times. You move this all the way down. Once that happens, you're gonna flip this over. It's no longer a bonus action. But once one of these is completed, there's 4 of them, you can see here, or excuse me, not 4, 3 of them around the board. And they're going to be associated with various actions. And then down here, you can see, of course, once you finish one of those missions, this will also advance that. So in addition to the colony ship here, which I'll look at there, once that starts to upgrade, that will advance this as well as completing missions, and that's going to trigger the end of the game. So what you'll find is, like, it's kind of slow going at first because it is sort of difficult to build buildings and upgrade this stuff here. So you kind of go along with like not much really changing, and then you'll complete one of these missions, and then another one, and then the colony ship will upgrade, and then there'll be a whole influx of resources. And so the game will kind of snowball, sort of. It'll just the narrative arc of the intensity of all the things going on is going to increase, and then you'll find the end game can sneak up on you if you're not too careful. And then you're going to walk through, everybody's going to get another turn, you're going to score a bunch of bonuses here. This one, I'll just explain what they are so you have an idea. This one here is, again, all these cubes down here. That's going to score every time you pump up the advanced ship there. You're going to score points for all the ships that you built with the shipbuilding action. You're going to get points for having unlocked these and having a bunch of workers to fill it up. You'll fill it up based on the side of the board that you're on. So you can see, count up here and like, oh, if I got workers into there, I'd get 10 points. You got the technology tiles, which I talked about, the points from those. The blueprint cards, remember those give you points. The scientists, and then the end game bonus cards, which we just talked about a few minutes ago, you get points from those. And then you just add up all those points, and then that is going to be the winner of the game. So that's kind of the gist of the game. Real high level overview. If you want the detail, crunchy, mechanical stuff, definitely take up Paul's review. But that's just a game. You're bouncing back and forth, getting resources, getting blueprints, trying to set yourself up to build the certain buildings, to get the bonuses, to get those bonuses, to do efficient actions. You're trying to get crystals because that allows you to do these extra executive actions and so on. And really kind of watching what people are doing, trying to piggyback off where they're building, where they're going, trying to plan for that so that you can get the most optimal, coolest turn to do a whole bunch of free stuff on. There's two sort of beginner mechanic things I want to just mention before we jump back. This one here is you hand these out and you deal these out, and these give you your starting positions on the turn order track. I would make use of this. I think this is a cool thing. I've played with this. I like this. This just kind of gets you going, because even figuring out where you want to place to start your first game, okay, where do I go? Do I go over here and pick resources? Sure. But if I go over here, I get a free blueprint. I've already got a blueprint. Maybe I could build that on my first turn, or I could get a scientist, because the bonuses that you get up there is going to interlock with, what action you want to take. That's a lot of head stress. So I would say you play with this your first game, play with this your fifth game. Get that junk out of the way. Let's just get playing and I don't want to set the game up. I've seen this happen. And then we're taking 5 minutes where to put our first piece. That annoys me. So play with these if you want or don't. It depends on your mood, right? These I don't like. These, they give you little objectives here. So build these certain kind of buildings. Then you can get these new objectives here, and you get little bonuses there. Get rid of these. I think these are a red herring. I don't like them. I like that you have to sort of, again, sift through kind of the mechanics of the game to get at what the strategy is. I think these kind of will throw you off. I think you have to kind of stumble your first few turns to then be able to appreciate the game. So that's just my opinion. But I would not use these, but I would use these. I would use these today. For my 6th time playing it, I would use it. Okay, so that's the gist. Let's jump back to the head. Okay, so that's On Mars. I know that was a little bit of a rough overview. If you've skipped it and feel like it, go back and watch it. I do kind of highlight some strategic bits to it. So I think that might be important and fun for you to kind of have that kind of knowledge, or a little bit of pre-baked preparedness going into your first game if you've not played it before. So let's go over my 3 pillars of reviews, and I'll kind of get into some of the more nuancy funkiness of it. Playtime. So playtime isn't too bad. I've found that it's about 2.5 hours. I think it could go to 3, but I'll caveat my playtime with that I've not played with 4. I played it solo, it's garbage, and I played it 2 and 3 player. And it's always right about 2.5 hours with the 3-player game. So I could see, 4-player going 3.5 hours. That's a tough thing, because this is going to be a tough game for people to get into. If somebody had never played a Vital Lacerda game before, and then they played this, it's going to take them longer to play and figure it out. That's just how it goes. So it's really going to be group dependent. It's going to be very dependent on everybody's kind of attitude about playing a very heavy, crunchy, gnarly, nasty Euro, which is what this is. So your playtime is going to vary. If somebody told me it took their group 4 players 5 hours to play, I'd say, yeah, I believe it. You know what I mean? So it was all our first play or whatever. But my experience is, we play with a lot of, the people that I play with are all people that like to play heavy Euros. And so we get it done about 2.5 hours. So there's that. Player count. Again, I haven't played it with 4. I played it 5 times. I played it 1 player, 2 player, and 3 player a few times. And for 1 player, I mean, if you watch any of my top 10 solo game videos recently, I hate this solo game. I hate it solo. I just hate these kind of games solo. Not hate. I don't think they're bad. I'm not making a judgment on the design. I just hate them. I don't like competitive games that have a solo mode. There's a lot of people that don't have a game group or like to play these kind of games solo. Maybe it's good. I don't know. You can't ask me because I do not know. As far as 2 and 3 player goes, I absolutely loved it at 2-player, and I absolutely love it at 3-player, and I would 100% be willing to try it at 4-player and play it, and I'm sure I would love it. There'd probably be one stick in the mud, you know, because the more people you add, the more chances for a stick in the mud. There'd probably one stick in the mud. I didn't like it because it was going a little long. I would be prepared for that, hopefully. Maybe I would be the stick in the mud. I don't know. But, you know, I could go a little long, but I would totally be down to try out 4 players. Now, the whole, like, piggybacking off of each other thing still happens in a 2-player game. It's quite prevalent even. And so it's even more prevalent and more nasty and more confusing, and there's more little paths to kind of worm your way in a 3 and probably a 4-player game. So I would probably say, I don't know, this played so good at 2-player that I don't really know what my favorite player count could be, having not played it at 4. I don't think it really matters. Honestly, I don't think it would matter. You know, if it was like, hey, let's take the afternoon and play a 4-player game of this. Everybody's got time. We booked out 3-4 hours so we can take our time. We could, you know, grab a pizza or whatever you want to do. You know, then I would say 4 players would be perfect. But 2 players is really cool, and 3 players is really cool too. So if you like or a couple or something like that, then I would get this because I think it plays excellent at 2-player. Really, really excellent. There is a little bit of scaling I didn't cover in the rules part, but it's not a whole lot of adjusting you got to do for 2-player. So that's the player count. Now, the last pillar of what is this game like? Well, it's like a Vital Lacerda game, right? I mean, there are so many things that this does that remind me, I would say kind of reminds me of like a smash up of Kanban and CO2. But I don't know. I'm pulling that out of my butt. Like, but it feels like a Vital Lacerda thing. You know, you've got all these interlocking mechanisms. One's feeding the other. The players are feeding each other. That kind of coexistent thing, which is really prevalent in CO2, is also really prevalent in the Gallerist. And I just kind of have to cut to the chase. So if you've played a Lacerda, you will be familiar with what's going on with your brain here. I would put this as my number 1 or number 2 Lacerda. The Gallerist is the only one I still have and I've kept. Absolutely love this game. I almost want to lean this way with On Mars being my favorite now because it kind of like shot and fired CO2 for me. Because it has some similarities. If you remember in CO2, you had like the kind of the blueprint idea. I don't remember what it's called in CO2, like the schematics and stuff. The one player could get, then the other could, you know, build the building, and the other one could do the exploit that building and that kind of thing. And you've got that same kind of daisy chain here, where you can have somebody build a building, build a complex, and then you've got a blueprint that's going to go nicely with that. You know, so you can get your upgrade building out and so on, or they have an upgrade and you've got a scientist for that and so on. So you've got that kind of stuff happening here as well, and it has a little bit of similarity where you're sort of developing the planet and stuff. The relational area stuff is quite different than it is in CO2. That's much more abstract here, where you have sort of a smaller sort of cross section of a little area of the planet, and you're all kind of building together, trying to build this, you know, little colony here. So it's got that kind of stuff going on. And, you know, the Gallerist has certain things like that where certain artists will sort of, the hype and the stock of that artist will go up and down, and players will sort of piggyback on that. And then you have the various different types of visitors, the collectors and the art critics, or whatever the heck the things are called, the different colored meeples. And then you'll have those kind of, you know, piggybacking off of each other in a little bit way, and you're kind of sharing those resources there. So that's the stuff that I really like. When a Vital Lacerda game, you know, when he does his games, is that sort of coexistence part of it, you know, married to all of this complexity and interaction. Because at the end of the day, all the mechanics are interlocking. So, and then in this game, the players are interlocking, and the different resource types are interlocking. And so it just feels like you're just building all of these different layers. And the thing that sort of pushes it for me, now the Gallerist has a theme that's sort of near and dear to my heart, sort of. I don't really care about buying and selling art. That's actually very antithetical to who I am. But that is an interesting sort of thing to like look at and sort of play as a game, for sure, is that art world and how artists are hyped for, you know, the benefit of the people running the art galleries. So I'm kind of like that theme. It's an interesting sort of thing to look at it. Sort of commodities that are worthless being made worth too much or whatever. That's a whole other discussion. This one has that thing where you're trying to, as a player, the theme of it comes through very clearly, is you're trying to sort of help the other players. You're all kind of doing this together, but you're also trying to carve out like a little bit of a specialization, a little bit of a niche for yourself in terms of what you specialize in. Like, what technologies are you upgrading? What types of buildings are you getting? What kind of blueprints are you getting and then upgrading those buildings for? So I can see very much, colonizing Mars, if and when that ever happens, and if it happens in such a way that it's somewhat of a, I don't know if I want to say capitalist, but market driven, right? There's market impulses driving like, it's not just some authoritarian country decides to take over Mars and then everybody does their thing. But in this situation, players are sort of carving out their niche. It's like, okay, we got up there, we've got a colony, we've got a little mine, okay, good. And now we got somebody else that's trying to build some of these terraforming important buildings, like the water and the trees and the plantation, which are going to trigger the oxygen, which then can build the homes. So you can go into that process and that endeavor as a participant in colonizing Mars and find out where you're going to make yourself useful. You could be somebody that's in there building homes and shelters or participating in the mines and so on. And so the theme of all that stuff really comes through here. And I think for me, if I had to really compare it to other Lacerda games, because of the theme, I think I lean a little bit more to this one, where like Kanban's probably a fine game. Like it is a great design, but it's like my work. So I really don't want to play that game. I'm like, oh, this is like work. This is exactly what I do at work every day. Oh, it is really. And it's like, oh, no thanks. But this is like, ooh, I'm participating in colonizing this planet, which we probably will never ever do as a race. So it's like, let's pretend that we can do this and we're capable of it. You can see I'm a little bit pessimistic today. So that's a fun thing to do. And then we're participating in this crazy art world. That's another thing I really like to do. So the theme of that is just so rich in the mechanics of Lacerda, when he's hitting on all cylinders. That's the cool thing, is you have these like impossibly complex mechanics that are somehow eliciting a really interesting theme and eliciting sort of the logistical side of all of this stuff, but in a fun way. It makes it fun. So that's a really cool thing about this. Now, let's take a quick step back. I don't want to talk too much further. But in terms of like approaching the game strategically, there's a lot of cool, interesting things. So I just got done talking about kind of the circle of life of all these different resource types and how the buildings and the upgrades and everything kind of work together. There are certain things that are good to get in the game that don't make all the resources necessarily equal. For example, I talked about during the walkthrough, the minerals are a wild resource. So that's a great thing to grab at the beginning. If you can sort of get on the mineral train and get a couple mineral mines going, then you're getting like free resources that can be whatever you want. So it makes you very flexible in terms of what you can do in the game. However, you want to get some oxygen, because the oxygen is good for a couple of things. One is building your own shelters, which you unlock, which will then give you workers. And the workers are going to you're going to be able to not worry about where that shuttle is moving so much, because you got a bunch of workers like, I can, whatever, take off to space. We got plenty of workers. We're busy down here. And you'll be, if you can get in a position like where you're like the only one on the side of the board, you're like, I got free reign of this. Even if there's some other workers left out here, I've got plenty of workers because I've been managing that, and now I can do whatever I want. And so I can do that easier. And then that's just like, that really is just like a little engine by itself, just getting the workers and unlocking the shelters. Now to do that, you need the plants and the waters that allow you to get workers on the fly, in the turn order bit. And then, you can build ships, and that's going to give you more stuff. And then having bots out, if you focus like on too much on one thing, if you don't get your bots out, that's been kind of the thing that will bite me sometimes, is you need to have bots kind of in strategic spots to be able to build and attach to certain spots, and upgrade buildings and get complexes out. Because if you don't have a bot next to the green building and you're like, oh crap, I have upgrades for green, I gotta move my bot up there, you don't want to like waste a turn just like, oh, I moved my bot and that was it. You want to do more in your turn, right? You want to be able to have the bot already there, having moved it from a bonus on a previous turn, and then now when you build it, you unlock the new upgrade and you've got the new executive action, which is going to give you the free thing to grab a free technology, and you get all this stuff and the music starts going. So what each of the resources is actually meant for is a really cool kind of thing strategically. And then he has that thing where he's got that sort of, in the other games that I've seen it, like in Vinhos and Gallerist, he has a thing, I always call it like the international shipping track. He has that kind of thing here when you build a building complex, and it's like that is what will give you the bonus. And so it's like, oh, well, I want to do the bonus because I already got a lot of bots out, so I see the bonus there for bots. So that means in this particular game, based on the random setup, I want to build water buildings. And so again, that whole thing kind of just keeps wrapping itself around and around. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Like, this is not really for everybody. It's big and complex and unwieldy. It might cramp your brain. It might take your group 4 or 5 hours to play it. But I have a lot of fun with it. I recommend it. It's crunchy and chewy. Like I said, I played 5 times. I certainly will play 5 more. I can't vouch, it's hard for me to vouch for after that, but I expect this one to actually stay in my collection. I think it's my favorite Vital Lacerda game, maybe Gallerist still. I haven't played that in probably a year or so. But it's definitely up there for sure. Like, they're right neck and neck. The Gallerist does some other things that are sort of, again, it's the kind of theme of it. It does some really interesting things with the theme that you just don't quite expect. And like this one does. So I definitely recommend it. I mean, it is a big, expensive game. The production's great. The insert that comes with this is super fantastic. Makes it easy to set up. You've got these little like trays here for the different color pieces. It just makes, managing the table space is very, very easy with this game. It does take up a good amount of table space, but they did a good job with the production. So I think the dollar amount is probably worth it, depending, if you can afford it, then it is. Yeah. So anyway, excellent game. Really had a great time playing with it. I can't wait to play it again. I want to play it again in a couple days. We'll see if the group is sick of it or not. But anyway, definitely check out On Mars. Thank you.